Okay, so as I said, welcome everybody today. We're going to have a CLE on identifying financial abuse in company directorships and tax debts. So I'll just start by doing an acknowledgement of country, and then we can get into an overview of what we're going to discuss today. So I'd just like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation in which we're meeting on today, and acknowledge elders past and present, and all our Aboriginal colleagues who potentially are on the call. Okay, so today for the webinar, I want to make it quite interactive. I've got my colleague Charis on the line as well. So please feel free to put questions in the Q&A box at any time, and she'll interject, and I'll also stop between each kind of section that I'm going to talk about to answer any questions you may have. So as a bit of an outline today, we'll just first touch on how to identify financial abuse. We'll then look at working with victim survivors. We'll then go on to tax and financial abuse and give you a few examples of, when this can occur, what to look out for, and a couple of case examples that we've worked with. I'll then go through, where to refer clients, when to refer clients for help, and look at what a Redfern Legal Centre can potentially do. And then we'll go through some further resources. But yeah, as I said, please put all your questions in the Q&A, and we'll stop throughout to discuss those. Okay, so firstly, financial abuse. I'm just going to, give a bit of an overview about what this is. So financial abuse is really a form of family violence where an abuser uses money to gain power and control over their partner. It's a pattern of control and exploitation, or where someone is sabotaged through money and finances. From our casework, we've seen that it's very common, and it kind of can affect people from all walks of life. It doesn't discriminate between age, income level, education level, I guess, socioeconomic background, gender or sexuality, or cultural background. That being said, we do see, I guess, the majority of victims of this type of abuse are women, and the majority of offenders are men. However, that's by no means, the definite rule, and we do have clients, from both genders. Also, our service isn't means tested, so we also see, people could have quite a lot of funds on paper. However, as part of the abuse, they're restricted from accessing these funds and still need to have access to free services. So some examples that you might see or come across of financial abuse can be things like refusing to contribute to joint debts. So where you've got one partner who's paying, the entire rent, or the mortgage, car loan, school fees, and that could result in their financial hardship or the financial hardship of the family. Another example is where someone withdraws money from a joint bank account or cuts off access to a joint bank account, or redistributes company assets in a way where one partner doesn't have access. We see this quite a lot, I guess, towards the end of relationships, when a property settlement is going to take place. Partners can use the systems to kind of continue to financially abuse their partner by restricting access to funds, which inhibits their ability to really run an effective family law property settlement. Another example is the transferring of joint property into another person's name to avoid a potential family law claim or minimise tax liabilities. So while there are provisions in the Family Law Act where a court can overturn this, you have to kind of get to a hearing to be able to even do that. Often partners transfer assets into their brother's name, different companies' names, that type of thing, to kind of minimize, I guess, the asset pool, which is not great. We also see coercion, so where people are coerced into signing documents, potentially become a company director, take out loans, sign personal guarantees, or make false declarations without their full consent, and without really making informed decisions around these financial decisions. Identity theft is another thing. So applying for loans or credit using the personal information of of the partner without their knowledge or consent. This can also include, using their ABN, using their TFN for, certain lines of credit. Taking control of finances or assets. So whether it be the car, the social security benefits, the superannuation, and, really excluding the other partner from the decision making, of things around these types of assets. And then we also see sabotaging businesses where someone can, siphon assets. Often if there's addiction issues, we see people siphoning company funds to fund these addictions, to the detriment of the company and of the other partner, and it's ultimately sabotaging that business. So I'm just going to quickly pause and just check. I can't see the chat, but Charis, were there any questions at this point?
Not at this point. Thanks, Julia.
Okay, cool. Okay, so working with victim survivors. So as you guys can imagine, a lot of the people that have experienced financial abuse, it often goes hand in hand with other types of domestic abuse. So, physical, emotional, sexual, all that type of stuff. So we have to be a little bit more sensitive when we take instructions or work with these types of clients. So financial abuse can be pretty subtle. It can often be disguised as financial hardship or accepted as part of traditional gender roles or cultural financial arrangements. So sometimes clients will come to you and they may not even kind of be able to articulate or really know that they're being financially abused, because this just might be how, things are done in their culture, or kind of what they expect, or they just think they're, not good at managing money and they're in financial hardship. Also, if somebody is being financially abused, that doesn't necessarily end the relationship. I would say with most of the clients I see, they are kind of out of the relationship, and that's when they're in a better headspace to, I guess, clean up the financial mess they've been left in. However, not all of the clients, are in this position, and there are additional concerns when they're still in the relationship, around safety, around, ongoing abuse, which it can continue happening. So the consequences of this can continue for years, especially through tax debts, negative credit scores, or eroded financial security. Often people who've experienced this type of abuse have no choice but to take out additional loans to try and consolidate the debt they have, and to continue covering future living expenses. So a really important thing to be aware of when you are, taking instruction from these types of clients, or working, as a financial counselor with these clients, or with a social worker where these issues may crop up, is definitely protecting client safety. And that's something we take particularly seriously in the team at Redfern Legal Centre. So again, as I said, that often financial abuse goes hand in hand with other types of abuse, which may be, physically violent. We always check on safe methods and times for contacting clients. Again, limit who has access to their information. Often we'll, get our social workers to do a tech kind of safety check and all that before we start giving advice, just in case there is some risk that the partner can log into the emails, get the information, and then use this against them. We're also very vigilant about client consent when sharing information with other services, and we make sure we get this from the outset if we need to potentially refer them to a pro bono law firm, or we work quite closely with the tax clinic at UNSW. So if we need to refer them to that service for, help with lodging returns or tax compliance. Again, yeah, as I said, so refer clients for safety planning support before taking action. Sometimes when they start, put it like kind of saying no, or looking further into a company or a directorship or a loan, that can be taken as like a provocative action by the perpetrator of the financial abuse. And this can be a particularly dangerous time for clients if there's a risk, particularly of physical violence. So it's, definitely particularly important if clients have not left the relationship or may return to the relationship, that these issues are addressed, I guess, very much at the forefront. Also, when taking instructions and assisting these clients, we've got to be cognizant of the impact of trauma. I guess it's a bit different from taking instruction from, your regular corporate client or somebody who is able to really articulate what's been going on. Sometimes if the abuse has been particularly bad, the people often have memory issues, could be disorganized storytelling, retelling their story can trigger them and cause them further distress. Often they have difficulty making decisions, and we often see that they disengage from support services. So we're just being aware of this because obviously, when we are writing submissions or taking, legal action or giving advice to individuals, they need to engage. We do also need clear instruction, and sometimes we do need a lot of evidence if they're trying to get out of certain debts. So just really being aware of how we collect this information from clients, whether it be setting up multiple appointments, whether it be, letting them come in person if it's easier, whether it be asking, if it's difficult for them to retell things, getting copies of, potential stuff they've told to other services, if there's an ADVO in place, taking factual scenario from that is often quite helpful. Yeah, so we focus a lot on trauma-informed practice. So as I said, limit the number of times a client needs to retell their story. Understand the client may be dealing with multiple systems on top of their trauma, so just allow extra time and patience. We often need to follow up with clients. Sometimes they miss appointments, so maintaining that. And yeah, also they may need multiple appointments to obtain clear instructions. We also see kind of sometimes the opposite. We've just got to be a bit careful. We're not psychologists or psychiatrists. We're not their counsellor. We're their legal representative or someone providing them legal advice. So often clients do want to really over vent as well. And then sometimes that's not entirely relevant to the instructions that we need about potentially, a certain issue. So really just kind of like managing how you kind of collect the information. So I'm going to move on more now to the tax and financial abuse and what we see in the service. But I just wanted to pause and see if there were any questions about, if anyone's had experience with people like this in their own practice or dealing with traumatized clients, vicarious trauma, or safety issues. Is there any questions or comments about that anyone wanted to raise?
Julia, there is just one comment, and you may be about to get into it, but just with the title, it's financial abuse in company directorships. Now, is this referring to financial abuse in workplaces, is the question?
So not necessarily. Look, the people, like I say, a couple might work together in a company, and then one like partner is abusing another partner, but it's not so much like the employee-employer relationship. So for our service at Redfern Legal Centre, we like it's limit our intake criteria is limited to intimate partner financial abuse. So there has to be that relationship. It's not just someone working for someone and their boss is financially abusing them or withholding wages or anything like that. At Redfern Legal Centre, we also have an employment practice where if someone is having issues with their employer, they can potentially get free legal assistance if they meet certain criteria. That service, however, is means tested, and I think at the moment they have to be earning under a gross of 80,000 a year to access that service and get advice. Whereas our service is not means tested. However, you need to have that intimate partner link to be able to get in. We also see often people come through the door where there's financial abuse of elders, but again, we don't do that, and we'd refer those people to seniors' rights. So I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Julia. And I can just see that, Serena, you've got your hand up. We are using the Q&A function. If you'd like to pop your question into that, we can get to it when you have time. Thanks, Julia.
No problem. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit more about tax and financial abuse. So I'll start off by, going through two kind of case studies of examples that we've worked in, and this kind of, I guess, will give you an overview of the types of things that come through the service or what to look out for if you're thinking about referring a matter through to the Financial Abuse Service at Redfern Legal Centre. So first, Carmen's story. Carmen was from a CALD background and experienced financial and emotional abuse from her husband after migrating to live in Australia with him. Her husband managed all their finances. Her husband coerced her into signing paperwork that she did not understand. She's now realized that it was to open a business in her name. She never had anything to do with running the business. After separating from her husband, she received a letter from the ATO telling her that she owed them a lot of money, and they're now debt collectors that are chasing her. She suspected it was something to do with the business, but she had no idea where to start. She's never lodged an Australian tax return herself. She's terrified of going to prison or being made bankrupt because she cannot pay the amount owing. So this is quite a common example of something that can come through. Often with this type of client, they're probably quite financially unsophisticated. They don't understand Australian systems. And it's all very overwhelming for them. They also may have come from jurisdictions where tax law is a lot stricter and can be met with potential personal prison terms, which is not really something we see in Australia. But just being aware that, they're coming with all that background of where they may come from. So it is super scary and overwhelming. I know for some people it's really hard even just to like call the ATO or log on to MyGov. So the whole thing can seem super overwhelming. So in a scenario like this, we'd probably first, try and obviously calm them down and try and go through some, I guess, information gathering, as she's not even exactly sure if she is a director, or kind of like the structure of the business. The first thing we would do is recommend they do personal name searches to find out whether they're a director of certain companies, and you can run certain searches through InfoTrack or directly on ASIC's website, where for a small fee, clients can get company extracts and see the current and historical kind of situation of any companies that they might be directors of. So we kind of start with that. And then by collecting information, we can see, okay, did you know about it? Were you involved? Or no, were you totally coerced? And do we potentially need to go to ASIC to try and get the directorship annulled? And then looking at what the ATO sent them, looking at the notice, see, okay, is this tax in the company name? Has it been attributed to you personally? Do you have a defense for the relevant period? And just going through all the steps and looking at that. And then often reassuring them that, there are teams in the ATO that look at financial abuse, look at hardship, and just by engaging, that can mitigate a lot of issues and try and assure them that, they won't be going to prison, but they need to engage with the ATO and try and get the debt sorted as soon as possible. So another example of the type of clients we have is Lucy, and she's probably what I would call a more sophisticated client who, kind of does understand processes, the company, what she signed. However, due to family abuse and financial abuse, she's then ended up in a situation where she's got issues. So Lucy started a company with her partner. They ran it together successfully for 5 years, but then he changed. He started yelling at Lucy and prevented her from accessing information about the company. She found out he was taking money out of the company accounts and there wasn't enough left to pay staff or suppliers. Lucy also found out he was gambling. Lucy tried her best to save the company, but eventually it went into liquidation. Lucy is separated from her partner, but has now been issued a director penalty notice for unpaid superannuation guarantee charges and PAYG withholding, and she is worried the company was trading while insolvent. She's trying to negotiate a family law property settlement with her ex-partner, but he's refusing to provide financial disclosure. So, with someone like Lucy, you can see that, she was actively involved in running the company. There's clearly no issues around consent to becoming a director as they were running it together successfully for 5 years. Clearly, in this case, there's an addiction issue with gambling and potentially also, abuse issues with being more controlling around the finances. Um, so with something like this, we'd probably, start by going through and giving Lucy advice on her duties as a director, because there is obviously a duty not to trade while insolvent, discussing the implications of that and what might happen. Also talking about the liquidation, seeing where it's up to. She obviously is totally aware that the company is a separate legal entity, but to her, so she's not necessarily going to be liable for company debts, but going through and checking if she's signed personal guarantees, also going through the director penalty notices, seeing if she has any defenses to them, and if not, seeing if they can be sorted out through the liquidation or if a payment plan needs to be put in place. And then as we're a multidisciplinary team, we also have credit and debt and family law in the team. We could potentially get our family lawyers involved to give her some advice about her property settlement with her ex-partner and then discuss issues with her about the financial disclosure. So I guess these are just the two examples of, we obviously get a wide range of issues, but I'd say a lot of the cases kind of fall into these two domains. So someone who like really doesn't know, doesn't even understand, basic things about separate legal entities, and then somebody who does understand kind of what they've signed and the structure and can give clearer instructions. However, they're still in a total pickle because of financial abuse and someone often just totally wasting the money in the company or personal finances. So were there any questions on this or anything else that I may have previously mentioned? I'll just pause again for Charis to have a look at the Q&A.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, there are a couple. We've
Sure.
got kind of a comment and a question from Candace, just saying that this is really helpful so far for their clients that are in small business, that then have a partner, ex-partner that's the user of violence. It sometimes comes up that our clients don't know how to leave the relationship because their car is also in the business. They find out that they are directors or in partnerships and they don't have the information about it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We see that a lot. So when we've got a lot of stuff with the car stuff. So we've got our financial counselor or our credit and debt lawyers who will help, giving advice around getting the registration changed from a company to the individual. Often this does involve consent of the directors, whereas if the ex-partner is a director, it can be a bit difficult to get them to consent. But looking at giving advice around that. And then, yes, we also see issues with kind of dissolving partnerships. Partnerships are a bit sticky, especially when it comes to tax, because unlike a company where it's like a separate legal entity and the company's got limited legal liability, a partnership is a look-through entity. So it's people who are partners are jointly and severally liable in their personal capacity for all debts of the partnership. So then we see big tax debts then being attributed to individuals directly. So again, looking at, potentially payment plans, potentially asking the ATO to do a non-pursuit, potentially, if it's really significant abuse and it can be really, they've got a lot of, I guess, contemporaneous evidence to support their position, putting in potential submissions about hardship to the ATO to try and get the commissioner to release them from tax debt relating to those structures that they've been entered into without their knowledge or consent.
Thank you. We have another question here. So in Carmen's example, what supporting information is required when advocating? And also Carmen wasn't involved in the business, but how do we tell?
Sure. So I'd say first thing to do with Carmen is if she like doesn't know what's happened at all, and she might even not know the name of her husband's business or her husband's company, is go and run a director name search on InfoTrack, and that will search all the company register with ASIC and tell her what companies she's a director of. I think last year it might have been $49, but I think now it's about $55 to run that search. and for us, we don't really have the capacity to do disbursements for clients, so we often see if they can pay for that. And to be honest, 9 out of 10 times the client's fine to pay that, even if they are on a really tight budget. But I know that's obviously a consideration for some clients. Potentially another option, if it's a bit cheaper, you can, if they know the name of the company and they kind of know that they wouldn't have been signed up for any other companies, they can go directly onto ASIC's website and print a company extract from the register, and it's cheaper. I think it's $20 to, or 20 or $21 to obtain that extract, and you can get a current and historical extract within that. So then that would show me or a legal advisor, when the company was incorporated, what's happened, who are the office holders, who are the shareholders, and get information around that. We can then look at the note. We also need the notice from the ATO to see, okay, what type of tax is this? Is it in her name? Is it in the company's name? Has she engaged with the ATO? Is she on a payment plan? Has debt collection activity started? Like, at what stage is it at? Does she have access to her MyGov? So I would then say, potentially calling the ATO. You can call the advocate line with the client, which I find really useful because you skip the queues, to just get through and get more information, and then be able to, see, okay, can we put something on hold? And then what is the best avenue for us to do? Are we able to write a submission to the ATO under a certain provision to try and get her released from this debt? If it was a director penalty notice, does she have a defense that she wasn't able to perform her duties as director during the period of, where the debt has arisen because of the financial abuse and family violence? And do you have evidence that you can put into a submission with that? So I think the main thing is originally doing the kind of information gathering to find out exactly the position the client's in, and then asking them if they have contemporaneous evidence to support any submission you need to put forward. So, apprehended domestic violence orders are great if they've gone to the police, if they've been engaged with other services, or often we have clients who they've been involved with gambling aware for their partner. That's great. So anything that can kind of substantiate and corroborate their claims that they're making. And I guess always the more contemporaneous evidence you have, the better for trying to get some relief from potential debts, or if they need to be removed from the directorship entirely and have it annulled, and then they won't be responsible for the debt. But to get it annulled with ASIC, information about, he signed her up after they broke up, or she didn't know, he forged her signature, and just putting together evidence around that. So clients can always sign a stat dec. Obviously, the more evidence you've got, the more compelling it is. So yeah, I hope that answers that question.
We have a few more comments and questions, Julia. Is it
Sure.
okay if we keep going? So just
Yeah,
on
definitely.
on the DPNs, are you able to provide a little bit more detail on a DPN when a client isn't able to pay? And also, how can DPNs be resolved by liquidation if they don't end up with the individual directors?
Sure. So I guess headline point, director penalty notice is a notice that can be issued to directors of companies when the company has not paid certain tax debts. So pretty much directors aren't liable for general company debts. The company's a total separate legal entity, and just because the company has certain income tax debt in it, that does not mean a client's or a director's liable for that. However, there are 3 types of debts where the ATO can issue a notice to make a director personally liable for debts of that company. So those debts are GST, and then superannuation guarantee charge, and then also PAYG, so withholding. So I guess like tax due on employee wages. So as you can see, kind of like the flavor, the nature of those are, I guess, where there's employee entitlements, the ATO can make a director of a company responsible personally for those. So once a DPN is issued, a company can liquidate within, or either pay the debt within 21 days of the notice, and then it won't be attributed to the director personally. If they're not able to do that, the company can liquidate if it's in that position, or start the liquidation process. However, with superannuation guarantee charge, a liquidation does not will not void or will not remove the debt relating to super. So it can for GST or PAYG withholding, but super is different. Super needs to be paid. Often we see with our clients, like they're not within that initial 21 days. Like they've come to us when they've already had the notice and it's been already attributed, excuse me, it's already been attributed to them personally. And it could be months or even sometimes years that it's sitting on their account. So what we will do in those cases is, normally there's 60 days that a person can raise a defence to the ATO from the time the debt's issued. However, they often look at out of time submissions. So it will still encourage them, if they have evidence, to put a submission in. And essentially there is a defence under the Act whereby the wording's kind of, I'm just paraphrasing here, but it's that if during the relevant period, so the relevant period is when the debt was incurred by the company, the director did not have management and control of the company due to illness and or any other good reason, that can be a defence to having the debt attributed to them personally, and the commissioner can release them from the debt. So we've written submissions where we're saying due to family violence, that meets the and any other good reason criteria, and therefore they should be released from the debt. So again, these take a very long time to kind of put together, and then also the ATO does often take like a few months to even review and give an answer whether they're going to like agree with the position or not. We've had some clients who've put submissions in and they have not been released. Unfortunately, it's been rejected. But we've had other clients who have put these submissions in, and the ATO has agreed with the reasoning. It is they've satisfied the defence and they've been released from that debt on their personal account. I'd say the submissions that are more effective and have more merit are the ones where there's more contemporaneous evidence. So ADVOs, if there's police reports, there's evidence that they've gone and tried to engage other services or potentially their GP or a counsellor. Putting all that in does really help with building out the submission. If somebody can't be released from the tax debt, or they don't meet the defence and they were a director during that period and they were kind of involved in the business but not like fully, unfortunately there's often not a lot people can do. They can go on a payment plan with the ATO, or if they're in a really bad position or financial hardship, they can potentially put a hardship application in with the ATO to try and be released from tax debt due to hardship. However, again, the threshold is very, very high for this, and it's unlikely that people are released from tax debt, often. But I'd say that's probably kind of the avenues to go. And then in some cases, if people can't pay, the ATO sometimes agrees to like a non-pursuit, where the debt will sit on the person's account, and in future years, if they're earning more income and they get a tax refund, those refund amounts will be used to like offset against the existing debt. But the ATO is not going to undertake like a debt collection compliance kind of activity. So they won't force the person into bankruptcy or anything like that. But I would just again kind of reiterate, the best thing is to really engage with the ATO, give them all the facts, be super transparent, and then they will try and work with the individuals. They've introduced a new vulnerability framework this year to try and work with vulnerable taxpayers who, obviously people experiencing financial abuse come under this umbrella. So it is on their radar to assist taxpayers who are unfortunately in these situations.
I have another question,
Sure.
a bit of a scenario. So it's from Ellie. If a woman's partner controlled her finances during a DV relationship and lodged tax returns showing she'd earned substantially more than she was actually paid for the work that she'd performed for him, what are the legal implications and what options does she have to rectify or challenge the tax declarations, including if the perpetrator has already paid the tax for the victim's declaration, but they need to contest it as their tax impacts their eligibility for settling income payments and child support?
Sure. Yeah, this is a big problem that we see a lot. So we often try and engage with like a financial counselor to help them speak to Centrelink and explain the issue, and then say, I didn't earn this, and it's kind of like an incorrect disclosure. And then going forward as well, my income will not be at these levels that it's kind of, I guess, previously been at. From a tax side, so I'm not an accountant, but we do refer our clients to, as I said, the tax clinic, and we also have a pro bono accounting firm that provides assistance. So they can always, a client always can put in an amended return and reduce the tax, and then that will issue a refund. There is some risk around doing this, as if you're making big changes, it can trigger the ATO to kind of do, inquire a bit more and potentially audit you, or ask a few more questions. However, everybody can amend their tax return if they've overstated their income or paid too much tax, or understated their income. There are periods of review for this. So for a company, you've got 4 years to amend a return, and for an individual, you've got 2 years to amend a return. That doesn't mean necessarily that you can't amend a return from beyond this period. However, you'd have to apply to the ATO. You'd put an objection in to kind of get leave or get permission to then put an amendment in. So it's just a longer administrative process to even be able to lodge that amendment and put in an amended return. And then, yeah, if someone needed to amend their return and they didn't know how to do it themselves, we would refer them to a tax agent to provide assistance with this.
Okay. We have a
Okay.
few more questions, Julia. Do you want to keep going, or would you like to do them towards the end?
Yeah, I'll take one more now, and then I'll move on to the next part of the presentation. But then I'll take more questions at the end as well.
Okay, great. So if a company has been deregistered by ASIC for non-payment of registration fees, does this change the ATO's approach to existing company tax debt or unlodged income tax returns?
Again, it's a case by case scenario. It can, if it's been deregistered. However, often, you can't if an individual goes to deregister their company, you can't deregister a company if it's got debt owing. So often we see companies have been struck off, but it's more just ASIC's internal process when the filing fees haven't been paid for a couple of years. So the ATO debt will still stand there. If it's just in the company name, and the company's kind of been struck off, it's not trading, it's like a liquidation. You can go back and explain this to the ATO that really the entity doesn't exist anymore. It has no assets, like they're not gonna get anything, and that can seize the collection action. However, if it's a director penalty notice and the debt is in the person's personal name, purely deregistering the company or liquidating the company may potentially not remove this debt. But again, it would be, it's be hard to answer that question. It's like looking exactly at the notice, what entity the debt's sitting under, and then, different approaches to take then with the ATO. So I just reiterate, just getting really clear about where everything sits and what entity is potentially liable. And if it's not the individual, explaining to them, like the risk doesn't entirely, like it's not really sitting with them, it's with the company, and speaking to the ATO about that. Okay, so I might move on to the next part of the presentation now, but then I'll just stop again and take further questions. So please keep asking them. This is great. Yeah, I really wanted this to be interactive, so this is really good, guys. Okay, so again, just things to look out for: warning signs of financial abuse. So business loans the client knows little about, business or company the client knows little about. So again, that would be a situation where they kind of have been coerced into directorships, so they don't know about them, or they're getting notices about something. They're like, what is this? So that's when you do those additional searches to see if they're a company director. Again, clients sign personal guarantees for the business. This is very common. Often they will guarantee a business loan on their family home, which again, it's quite difficult to get out of that, and it might need to be resolved in family court property settlement. Ex-partners lodge the client's tax returns. So again, checking if the information is correct. Clients receiving a director penalty notice from the ATO. If a client has difficulty answering basic questions about their tax or financial situation, this could also be a kind of like a red flag of financial abuse. Client has difficulty obtaining documents and the client doesn't have their login details to the accounting software or to MyGov. So yeah, we see a lot of the weaponization of the tax system. So it could be, as is kind of been raised with by some of the questions, income manipulation or falsification of tax returns. This is to either reduce or reverse child support payments, tax debts, Centrelink debts, and it can lead to sometimes the overpayment of family tax benefit, and then the recipient will potentially will have a Centrelink debt they'll need to pay back. Also, when this happens, when there's income manipulation, it can lead to ineligibility for Centrelink, which I think one of the questions was about. Again, fraudulent BAS or GST lodgements, misuse or fraud involving the ABN or the TFN. There was a big issue a couple of years ago where people were kind of running schemes. It was kind of led by, I think, organized crime, but there were schemes where people would claim fraudulent GST credits in the name of other people. So often people would use their partner's ABN to do this, and then that, like, them being left with a lot of debt. So I know the ATO did a big project on looking at how are we going to, get out of, obviously recuperate money that's been incorrectly credited, but also how do we alleviate this pressure on people who have been victims of fraud. Director liabilities. So again, director penalty notices or potential insolvent trading issues, and then false tip-offs and unauthorized access to the ATO accounts. I might pause now just briefly. Does anyone have any questions before I get onto kind of what our service can do or where to refer people for help?
We have a few different questions, Julia. Do
Sure.
you just want me to go through some of them?
Yeah.
So do you educate the client on impacts with child support and Centrelink with FTB, etc.?
No, so I'm not an expert on Centrelink. We've got a financial counselor in the team who can give a bit of advice on that, but sometimes we then will refer them out to other services if people in our team can't help. It might be better to find like a more specialist financial counselor who's got more knowledge about navigating child Centrelink. We have 2 social workers in our team who can also assist and help people with like navigating Centrelink, but that's not something the lawyers will be able to give advice on.
Yeah. And for child support, for the child support part, can they lodge a change of assessment that can reduce her income used outside of the ATO income?
I'm not a specialist on child support, so I can't answer that, but I'd say the best place to go is probably the Legal Aid's child support service. So I refer a lot of clients to that who are trying to do that exact thing, and get the assessment changed.
Okay, great. And you might need to help me with this one, but clients who have experienced financial abuse as a result of an Operation Protego debt incurred via actions of a partner and client that didn't receive benefit. Can you talk through remedies and likely timeframes?
Sure. So that was the GST kind of credit fraud I was previously alluding to when I spoke about weaponization of the tax system. So we've got a lot of clients who've had this, but at the moment there hasn't been clear guidance from the ATO about what to do. So I think they're still coming to a position on how to approach it. I've had a few clients who the debt is just on hold at the moment, but it has not been removed from their account. So I would recommend just speaking to the ATO about potential remedies and seeing what they're doing. Again, it's also like a case by case base. We have had some clients who did know about the fraud, and then we made the decision that based on because of their knowledge, unfortunately, there wouldn't be much merit of success of putting like a hardship application in or anything like that. And we didn't want additional fees to be applied to their account. But I would say, yeah, there hasn't been, as far as I know, we haven't got consensus from the ATO yet. So I would say call them up, and then hopefully they can pause the debt while they're deciding how they're going to progress these cases.
Okay, do you want to do one more?
I'll do one more and then I'll move on to
Okay.
referring clients.
Okay, so how is the risk managed to help the client gather information from the ATO about debt status which then makes them aware of the debt, when the goal might be to request a release of debts and other hardship options on the grounds that they didn't know they were directors or aware of the debts.
Yeah. So I get what you mean, because there is that concern that if they're then kind of stop trying to sort out the issues of the company, it's like, are they then taking actions as a director when they're trying to argue that they were never a knowing director, and they got no involvement in the management and control of the company. However, I've not seen look, in all my cases, and this is, I guess, anecdotal, it's not like a definitive thing from case law or from the ATO guidance, but I guess anecdotally for me, I've never seen an issue where a client's just trying to gather information to put a submission in, to argue that they should be released from a certain type of debt, or they're not responsible for the director penalty notice because they didn't have knowledge and that they were suffering financial abuse at the time, or if they're trying to get the directorship annulled through the 370 process with ASIC. I've never seen where just collecting information, then kind of works against them, and there's an argument put against them that they were acting as a director because they were just collecting information. So I would definitely still recommend that they do that fact finding and put the submissions in. Okay, so I might move on now to where to refer clients for help. So, you can come to us if there's urgent legal issues, such as court proceedings that have commenced, a client's received a director penalty notice, client has extensive personal tax debt, or the company has extensive tax debt. If the client is a director and they made that without their knowledge or consent, if a statement of claims been served, the default judgment's been entered against the client for a debt, or issues where savings or assets are being quickly eroded. So this is the contact information. It's the Financial Abuse Service New South Wales within Redfern Legal Centre. So as I previously mentioned, it's not means tested, but the financial abuse needs to relate to the intimate partner, and also the person needs to either be in New South Wales or the activity occurred within New South Wales. So that's the email, but they can also call the online form. They can also go onto the website and fill out the online form and try and get assistance through that way. So our eligibility criteria, as I just said, was intimate partner abuse, connected to the financial issue, residing in New South Wales, or the issue arose in New South Wales. And then, yes, we're not income or means tested, or we're not, you don't have to be a citizen or have permanent residency to get advice from the service. One thing I will say about the income and the means testing is, if somebody does have access to a lot of, well, they might not have access, but if there are a lot of assets in the asset pool and they're going to then run like a family law process, we would often recommend they reach out to get litigation funding. So then they, have private representation, and they can pay at the end based on their access that they're going to get to assets in the settlement. So yeah, as I said, what we can help with: tax debts, debts connected to financial abuse in intimate partner relationships, director penalty notice, director annulment forms, ASIC fees. And then we're also a multidisciplinary service. So we also provide family law advice, credit and debt advice, immigration law advice, financial counselling, and social work advice. We're not a crisis service, however, so if the person is in crisis, it's better to call like the police or 1-800-RESPECT or other crisis domestic violence services. So we don't do Centrelink debts. We'd refer those to welfare rights. We don't do rental arrears. That's more like tenants union or different local tenancy services. And then again, for non-intimate partner financial abuse, it's a debt helpline, seniors rights services. And then again, as I said, we're not a crisis service, but they can call 1-800-RESPECT if they need to. Redfern Legal doesn't just have the financial abuse service. We've also got a credit, debt and consumer law practice, discrimination and human rights law, inner city tenants advice, First Nations justice, police and government complaints, employment the right service, which I mentioned before, if someone's having an issue with the employer, and the International Student Legal Service Centre. So yeah, call our intake line or go onto our website if you need more information about that. I might stop here and just take any further questions that are in the chat. And then this is just, I'm just showing on the screen now some further resources. So you can just really go onto our website. We've got a lot of stuff there about domestic violence. We've got previous webinars and recordings that are up. There's fact sheets, toolkits, and then, you know, some case studies, which are great. Charis, were there more questions on the chat?
Yeah, there are a few. So do you support clients to achieve financial settlements in court? And if so, based on your experience, what impact do you believe evidence of financial abuse has on judges' decisions?
Sure. So I think that's probably more about family law and whether we support clients through a property settlement. So our family law service, as you can imagine, they're pretty busy. So as pretty much they don't offer representation unless it's a very, very rare case. So they're mainly doing one-off advices, and then we would refer them on, either try and get them linked in with a pro bono lawyer if we can, or refer them to legal aid, or try and get them, you know, sometimes to like a low bono firm if possible. But we're more giving that initial advice about their options and rights. But we would then, yeah, obviously flag the financial abuse element. But yeah, I just don't really have case studies or anecdotal evidence around how a judge would consider financial abuse.
Okay. Thank you. And then do you encourage or facilitate clients to engage with the New South Wales Police in reporting the financial abuse?
So we have our social workers, and I know the social workers do work with clients for you know, certain matters with police. If there's often, you know, if they need to go and report something, they can provide them assistance and support in doing that. Me personally, I'm not really working with you know, making reports to police or that type of thing, because it's a lot more like working with the ATO, working with ASIC, or potential like civil issues where they might have a default judgment against them. So it's more like kind of working with the courts in that respect. However, if somebody wanted to make a report to police, or you know, they're experiencing domestic violence, we definitely recommend that they contact their local police station. But it's a bit outside the scope of the work that we do.
Okay, and does this information that you've given today also apply to children who have been placed as directors?
I actually don't know. I've never had a client as a child who's been placed as a director. So I'm not sure, but that's a super interesting question.
Um, are you also able to provide, if you haven't already, are there any, we don't have another team in each state, but where would you go for help in other states?
Yeah, so as I've said, we only a New South Wales wide service. So the person has to be here, or the issue has to relate to a time when they were living here, even if they've now subsequently moved. We've got a huge network where we can refer people to other you know, financial services or legal centres within different states. So again, that's a case by case issue. But you feel free to drop us an email if you're looking for, if you can't find anything on Google, or you don't have, you don't know exactly where to go to, you can drop us an email and we can try and find you an appropriate referrer in the different states.
Okay, I've just got a question that was posted previously, but it says, if the client is the only director, ASIC won't annul a directorship. Where do we go from there when the ATO will remove the DPN if we can prove client is no longer a director?
Yeah, so I've had this problem too. To be honest, again, case by case, I have had sometimes the director being removed by ASIC, you know, and the company kind of being deregistered, and then you can show that to the ATO. However, it is problematic with when there's a sole director. So I believe there's some advocacy work coming from Melbourne to try and get this changed, or get a workaround, with ASIC about this, but at the moment there's no cut and dry clear answer to this.
Okay, that is, I think, all of the questions I have at the moment. If there are any others, please feel free to post them in the Q&A.
Okay, cool. Well, we're pretty much at time, so I'll just go through the last couple of slides. It's all more just about Redfern Legal Centre. So again, you can go on our website to see our recent law reform submissions. We're part of the Economic Abuse and Reference Group, so you can see the submissions there, or sign up for our newsletter, or follow us on various social media accounts. And I've just put up the contact details again for anyone. So also at the end of this presentation, I believe there is a survey. So it'd be wonderful. We love getting feedback about, what worked in this presentation and what didn't, or potentially other topics that you'd like information on. So please complete this survey and let us know your thoughts.
I just have one other question that's come through, Julia, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Yep. So how would the ATO assist with outstanding returns when the client has been left as a sole director but has no financial details of company operations?
Again, this is it's a bit hard to answer this question because it is quite broad. But again, you have to obviously contact the ATO, let them know the reasons why the company returns are outstanding, and explain to them the issues with information collecting. But I would then refer to an accountant who would then try and work with the client to put they can maybe base it on prior year returns or get some information together to try to be able to lodge returns, trying to get access to potential different accounting software which may hold information. So I'd say this is probably one where you'd refer to an accountant to try and get that resolved. And also it might be a situation where you then need to contact the ATO and dereg, say if they're registered for BAS or GST, deregistering those so no further returns need to be lodged.
Okay, amazing. And if you don't mind, someone's just requested that you could go back to the contact details page if possible.
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. Thank you. And
Not a problem.
that's all the questions.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much to everyone today for signing in. I hope this information's been useful. And yeah, if you've got any questions, please feel free to drop us an email, and I'm happy to reach out and have a chat about anything. Or if you've got a certain client in mind that you just want a bit of advice on, or you're thinking to refer, please feel free to reach out.